The wind came out of the west with the sound of a faraway sea, though there was no sea in that country-only prairie, endless and spare, rolling under dry grass and fine dust, and a sky so wide it seemed to press down on a man's shoulders. At sundown, the light broke into bands of gold and iron gray, and everything gained a severe clarity. The line of barbed wire, the twisted cottonwood, the brief flash of a crow's wing cutting through the air. A chestnut horse moved along an old wagon road at an unhurried pace. On his back rode a man not young and not yet old enough to be called worn out, only shaped by time and by the habit of measuring each motion as if it carried a cost. Beneath a weathered hat, his eyes held the quiet attention the open land teaches, the steady look of someone waiting for an answer from the horizon. His name was Elias Mercer. He had been gone 12 years. He did not ride back for gold, or revenge, or the kind of glory men brag about when the lanterns are low. Those currencies had already taken more from him than they had ever paid. He returned because some things cannot be left behind like broken tools. He returned because there are choices you can postpone, but not escape. And because even in the harshest country, there is a calling that rises from the ground and reaches a man wherever he tries to hide. The road led to Dry Creek, a knot of timber and stone beside a thin ribbon of water, worn in distant snow-melt, and dead before summer as end. A frontier town, like so many raised in a hurry, hurt in a hurry, held together by promise and stubbornness. In Dry Creek, days smelled of coal smoke, horse sweat, and cornmeal. Nights smelled of kerosene lamps and uncertainty. Elias knew every bend of that road. He knew the stones by feel, as if his memory had worn grooves into them. But something had changed. Not the land, not the town, the man. The boy who once rode out with pride and fear burning in his chest was gone. The man who returned carried a heavy calm, like an entire winter folded into his ribs. When the first building came into view, low and dark against the sky, the horse slowed as if it too remembered. Elias stopped on a small rise overlooking the valley. From there, he could see the main street cut through dust and long shadows. He saw the roof of the general store, the watering trough, the crooked steeple of the church leaning, more than he recalled, or perhaps his memory had once straightened what it wished were true. He sat still for a time he could not measure. Then, to no one at all, he said, "I came back." The wind answered with silence. A town that does not forget. When Elias rode into Dry Creek, the first true blade he felt was not cold or hunger. It was the gaze of other people. A small place learns the names of its dead, and learns faster still the names of those who left. Men paused outside the store with feed sacks in their arms and watched him as if they were looking at a ghost that had failed to stay gone. A woman on a boarding house porch pressed her hand to her chest, trying to decide whether to cross herself. Elias did not look for comfort in anyone's face. He dismounted, looped the reins over a post, and stood for a moment just breathing the street. Dust, smoke, the faint sourness of wet leather. The front of Harlan's Mercantile looked much the same older wood, darker with years, nails more visible, the painted letters faded. Elias pushed through the door. A bell on the jamb gave a thin ring, and that small sound seemed to travel backward through time. Inside, the air held grain, kerosene, and iron. Barrels stood in rows. Tools hung like old bones. Bolts of cloth waited behind the counter. A metal scale leaned slightly left, as it always had. Behind the counter stood a tall, narrow man, lifting his eyes from a ledger. His hair was no longer black. Gray threads ran through it, and his face had deepened, like ground cut by a plow. "I know that step," the man said, not smiling. Elias took off his hat slowly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harlan." The shopkeeper did not answer at once. He closed the ledger carefully, as if every page carried a debt. "Mercer," he said at last. The word was neither greeting nor insult. It was a fact. Elias nodded. "He swallowed. I came to see how things are. Harlan let out a slow breath through his nose. Things are always here, he said. It's people who sometimes aren't. He walked out from behind the counter and stopped a few feet from Elias, studying him as if trying to find the boy he once watched grow up. You shouldn't have come back, Harlan said, almost neutral. I know, and you came anyway. Elias met his eyes. There are things I did, Elias said, and things I did not do. Both brought me here. Harlan weighed that. Then he jerked his chin toward the back. There's coffee. Help yourself. If folks see you in here, at least they'll know you still have the nerve to walk through a door. Elias poured the bitter coffee into a chipped cup and drank as if the taste were part of a sentence he deserved. Harlan watched him for a long moment, then asked without softening it, You came for her? The word hurt tightened Elias's chest like a hand. I came for what I left, he said. And she is part of it. Harlan lowered his gaze, as if the floorboards had shifted. Then get ready, he said. Because what you left didn't sit around waiting with its hands folded. Life doesn't do that. Elias set the cup down carefully. Where is she? Harlan hesitated. That hesitation hurt worse than the answer. She's out on the place, he said at last. East of the creek, where your father's land was. She stayed. The land stayed. But he stopped, and the pause rang like a distant bell. But what? Harlan looked at him with a contained hardness. There's a boy. The world tilted inside Elias. It was not a full surprise. He had carried the suspicion for years, a shadow that kept pace with him, but hearing it spoken aloud gave it weight and breath. A boy means time, he thought. It means consequences. How old? Elias asked. His voice came out lower. 11, maybe 12. 12 years since he left. The arithmetic was plain. He did not ask more. He did not need to. He picked up his hat. Thank you, Mr. Harlan. Harlan nodded, but it was not forgiveness. If you go out there, Elias, he said, don't imagine you'll straighten what you bent with a few words. Land doesn't smooth out with talk. Neither do people. Elias looked down the street where the town waited like a jury. I didn't come back for words, he said. I came back for responsibility, what was left behind. The farm lay where pale grass gave way to darker soil stingy, but workable with stubborn hands. Elias knew that ground from childhood. He knew the stone that always caught the plow blade, the low place where water pooled in spring, the lone tree on the rise where crows kept watch. When he saw the house, his stomach turned. It looked smaller than he remembered, or perhaps he had grown larger inside, carrying more than he used to. The place bore signs of repair. New boards patched into old walls, a replaced window, part of the roof reinforced with sheet metal evidence of someone who had not waited for rescue. Elias stopped his horse at a distance. He walked the rest on foot, as if the approach required respect. Dust rose around his boots, and each step sounded too loud. Before he reached the porch, the door opened. A woman came out. She paused on the first step, as if the wind had pushed her there. For a heartbeat, Elias saw the young wife he once knew. Bright eyes, hair tied back with a simple ribbon, face sun-browned and brave. But now there was more an exhaustion turned into steadiness, a sorrow worn into habit. Clara Mercer. Not Clara Dawson anymore. Mercer, by a marriage that might have been more promise than life. She did not run. She did not shout. She did not weep. She only looked. And that look held a whole year of drought. Elias, she said, as if speaking the name of a distant place. He removed his hat again, but the gesture felt too small. Clara. Silence stood between them, not empty but crowded with words that should have been spoken years ago. Crowded with the sound of a wagon leaving, the cry someone swallowed, the long nights where a person learns not to ask. Clara came down one step. The board creaked under her, the same creak Elias remembered from long ago. Some sounds stay loyal. I thought you were dead, she said, not with drama, just the plain truth. Some days, Elias answered, I did too. Her eyes searched him, as if looking for an explanation written into his skin. Why are you here? Elias drew a breath that scraped his throat. Because I'm tired of running, he said. Because they're ISNT a corner of the world, far enough from a man's conscience. And because... He hesitated, feeling his heart strike against his ribs. Because I heard there's a boy. Clara did not move, but her gaze narrowed. Not hatred, something older and harder. Guarding. So someone told you. I didn't come to take anything, Elias said quickly. I didn't come to demand. I came to see. And to do what's right. Clara let out a short, humorless laugh. Right, she repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. You were always good with words. Elias, good with promises. I was good with promises because I didn't know the cost, he said. Now I do. A faint sound came from the doorway behind her. A shape appeared. A boy. He had dark brown hair, a narrow face, skin burned by sun. But his eyes caught Elias' immediately light eyes, like Elias's father's had been. And in them was a watchfulness no child should have to learn. The boy stood with one hand on the doorframe. Clara spoke without turning. Thomas, go back inside. But the boy did not move. He looked at Elias as if deciding whether this was danger or story. Elias felt his words fail him. He had crossed open country, faced hunger, stared down hard men, and still a child's stare made him unsteady. Thomas, Elias said softly, as if the name were both sacred and dangerous. Clara's voice sharpened. Don't say his name like that, as if you have the right. Elias raised his hands in a peace gesture. I don't have any right, he said. I know that. The boy took a step onto the porch. Clara turned, her eyes cutting the air. I said inside. Thomas looked at his mother, and there was obedience there. Not the obedience of a spoiled child, but the obedience of someone who understands his mother, carries the world alone, and cannot afford argument. He backed up, still watching until the door closed. The sound of it closing landed like a blow. Clara breathed slowly. You're not staying here, she said. I didn't ask to stay in the house. Not the house, not the land, not his life. The words lodged in Elias's chest. Clara, he said quietly, I can't undo what I did, but I can try not to make it worse. I can help, work, pay what I owe. She stared at him a long moment. You think it's an account, she said. Work a little, and it's settled? 12 years of winter, Elias. 12 years of nights I heard coyotes and thought it was a man coming. 12 years of planting and losing, of burying people, of holding my son through fever with no doctor in reach. 12 years teaching him to be a man with no father. And you come here talking about paying? Elias lowered his eyes. Dust on his boots felt heavier than iron. I don't deserve you listening, he said, but I had to come. Even if I leave tomorrow. Clara was silent. The wind stirred a strand of her hair. There's an old barn farther out, she said finally. If you want to work, you can sleep there, not in this house. And you do not speak to Thomas unless I say so. Her voice faltered, just slightly. He doesn't need your confusion. Elias nodded. As you say. She turned to go back inside. Before she stepped through the door, she paused, not looking back. Elias, she said, don't come here expecting me to be the same. I didn't come expecting anything, he answered. Only because it's too late to stay gone. She went in and shut the door. Elias stood alone in the dying light, listening to the wind and the distant call of a bird. That was how it began again, without welcome, without embrace, without easy redemption. Only the weight of what had been done, and what might still be done. The land's routine and a quiet war. The old barn smelled of damp hay and tired wood. Elias cleared a corner, laid out his blanket, and lay down like a man accepting sentence. That night he listened to boards shifting, wind worrying at cracks, an occasional coyote far off. Sleep came in pieces. He rose before dawn. Frontier life had taught him that a man who wakes late loses water, loses shade, loses chances. He drew a bucket from the well, washed his face, and the cold water felt like a warning. He worked without asking to be told. He mended a fallen fence, reinforced a corner of the corral, scraped the trough clean, split wood, hauled it to the stove. He did everything in silence, as if trying to prove he had not come to be a burden. Clara did not thank him. Sometimes she watched from a distance, her face caught between caution and exhaustion. Thomas appeared in the yard mid-morning with a small bucket of corn for the chickens. Elias saw him and felt the urge to speak, then stopped himself. A sudden gesture can spook what is already wary. The boy threw him a quick glance, sharp as a sparrow's. Elias returned to the work. At midday, Clara set a plate on the porch bread and beans without a word, then went back inside. Elias ate on a stump, looking out over the prairie. The beans tasted plain and honest food earned the hard way. He realized how often he had eaten easy meals in noisy places, where laughter was cheap and promises cheaper. This plate was different. This plate was real life. The life he had abandoned. Late afternoon brought another sound. Hoofbeats from the east. A rider appeared on the road, coat dark, hat firm, posture of a man accustomed to being noticed. Another younger man followed, rifle lashed to his saddle. Clara stepped onto the porch, one hand tightening on the railing. Elias stopped where he stood, a hammer in his grip. The first man dismounted with the smoothness of someone who believes he owns whatever ground he steps on. He approached with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, barely lifting his hat in pretend respect. "I came to see how the contract matter is progressing." Clara's voice stayed steady. "I told you, Mr. Rourke, there is no contract." Elias heard the name like a stone dropped into water. Rourke. Men like that came after the first dust settled, carrying papers and polished words, taking what others bled sweat to build. Rourke looked at Elias, his smile adjusting. "Well now," he said. "Looks like you have company," Clara answered before Elias could. "He's here to work." "He has nothing to do with you." Rourke took 2 steps, sizing Elias up the way a man sizes up a horse. "So you're the husband who disappeared." "I've heard. Dry Creek is small, but echoes carry." Elias did not enjoy conflict for its own sake. He had learned it always cost more than it paid. But he had also learned silence can be an invitation for someone to step harder. "I didn't come to talk to you," Elias said calmly. Rourke chuckled. "Didn't you?" "Because I came to talk to Mrs. Mercer, and to this land. Land has value, and it'll have more once the railroad shifts closer. A woman alone can't safely hold on to all this." Clara lifted her chin. "I've held it for years." "Yes," Rourke said, leaning in slightly. "Admirable. But life changes. Drought comes. Taxes come. Men who take advantage. I can help." Elias heard the trap behind the soft tone. Help was another word for control. She said no. Elias cut in, still quiet, but with steel underneath. Rourke turned his face toward him slowly, like Elias was a fly that would not land elsewhere. "You're not in a position to speak, Mercer. The town knows what you are, a man who ran when it was time to stay." The accusation burned because it carried truth. Clara stepped in sharply. "Go, Mr. Rourke, before I call the sheriff." Rourke opened his hands as if amused. "Call him. The sheriff has plenty to worry about. And I have paperwork." He produced a folded sheet. "This is a formal notice arrears and liens. If you can't pay what you owe, the law has its avenues." Clara went pale, but did not yield. "I will pay." Rourke tucked the paper away. "I'll wait." He looked at Elias again. "And you be careful." Dry Creek doesn't take kindly to ghosts that ride back in. He mounted and rode away, leaving dust and threat in the air. When the hoofbeats faded, Clara remained still. Elias approached slowly. "Does he have a claim?" Elias asked. Clara turned, and for the first time her exhaustion cracked through. "He has influence," she said, "and time. And I have bills." Elias looked at the house, the fences, the patched roof. "I can help with that," he said. Clara let out a short laugh, almost bitter. "You think money fixes everything?" "No," Elias answered. "But I know duty. And I know what it looks like when a man leans on a tired woman. I've seen too much of it." Clara studied him, and something in her face shifted, not soft, not forgiving, but perhaps less certain of itself. "Then work," she said. "Work until your bones remember what staying feels like." And she went inside. Elias stood in the yard as evening came, understanding the return was not only emotional. It was physical fences, debts, men like Rourke, and the way a town turns its eyes. The frontier did not forgive absence. And it did not forgive weakness. What Elias carried? That night Elias could not sleep. He sat at the barn door, staring at the sky. Stars filled it so thick it looked like a silent crowd. Somewhere far off, a train whistle sounded long, lonely, metal singing across the dark. He thought about the day he left. His father had died in a hard winter, when snow covered everything and food ran short. It was an ordinary accident, a spooked horse, a bad fall, and then the man who held the place together did not get up again. Elias had been in his 20s, and the weight of the farm dropped onto him like a yoke. Clara was newly married, too young for that much responsibility, but strong enough not to break. Still, Elias carried an old guilt, not being prepared, not being stronger, not being able to keep life from crushing the people he loved. When men came through offering paid work in a caravan, headed south steady wages, rumors of opportunity, Elias heard it as escape, not only from poverty, but from the feeling of failure. He told himself he would be gone briefly, return with money, make the place thrive, protect Clara and the child she carried. He left with those words, and then the frontier swallowed him. The caravan met hunger, storms, theft. Elias watched decent men turn hard, watched hard men turn cruel. At one point, he made choices he preferred not to see too clearly. He took work with men of questionable intent, hauled goods he did not ask about, closed his eyes to small wrongs because he was tired and afraid. He did not become a romantic outlaw. That was a story for people who did not live real life. He became something more common, a man surviving, turning each compromise into just for now. But for now, on the frontier has a way of turning into a life. And when he finally gathered enough money to go home, word reached him of illness in Dry Creek, hardship, deaths. Instead of returning, he stayed away. He stayed because he feared finding the world ruined by his absence. He stayed because deep down he knew he no longer had an excuse. Fear of judgment held him stronger than chains. 12 years. Now, under the stars, he saw it clearly. He had not only fled poverty, he had fled the duty of being a father. The night was cruel because it did not argue with him. It only let him hear what he had avoided for so long. The boy and the man. Days passed. Elias worked as if he could dig a road back into the past with his bare hands. He saw Thomas from a distance hauling water, tending animals, handling tools with an old seriousness. The boy was too steady for his age. He did not play the way other boys played. Childhood in that place was a luxury the land did not always allow. One afternoon, Elias was fixing a hinge at the corral when he heard a sharp crack. A calf had gotten loose and bolted toward the creek. Thomas ran after it, fast, but the ground was uneven. He nearly slipped. Elias moved on instinct. He ran too, caught the calf from the side, held it gently, calming it with a low voice. Thomas stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, watching. For a moment, father and son, though neither had said the words, stood side by side at a simple task, preventing a small loss that could have become a big one in that kind of life. Elias handed the rope to Thomas. "Tie it tight," he said, keeping his tone plain. Thomas took the rope, but did not take his eyes off Elias. "You know cattle," the boy said. "I learned early," Elias replied. Thomas worked the knot. "You come from far away?" Elias looked at the creek water, thin and stubborn. "Far enough to learn some distances aren't worth it." Thomas seemed to store the sentence like a coin. "My mother said I shouldn't talk to you," he said. Elias felt the sting and accepted it. "She's right to be careful." Thomas hesitated. "Are you related to her?" Elias drew a slow breath. The word father felt too large to fit in that air. "Was? I was her husband," he said. Thomas frowned. "Was? I made mistakes?" Elias said. "Mistakes have consequences." Thomas went quiet, then asked with the blunt honesty of a child, "Are you going away again?" Elias hated his own uncertainty. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I don't want to do more harm." Thomas looked down at the rope. "People always do," he murmured, as if it were a lesson learned too young. Then he led the calf back, leaving Elias standing at the creek, hearing his own failure echoed in a boy's voice. That night, Clara said nothing about it, but Elias noticed the light in Thomas's room stayed on longer than usual, as if the boy lay awake thinking. Elias lay awake too, because now there was something worse than the judgment of Clara or the town. There was the quiet judgment of a son who did not know whether he could hope for anything from him. Clara's choice. The weeks moved on, and the season came when the land shows its cruelty. The wind shifted, bringing finer dust. The creek shrank. Nights sharpened with cold. Mornings held a thin haze that promised no rain. One day Mr. Harlan came out with a small wagon. He brought flour, salt, nails, and a warning. "Rourke is buying land around you," he told Elias in a low voice while Clara was inside. "He wants to gather it up before the railroad." Elias's stomach tightened. "And this place?" Harlan glanced around as if fences could listen. "He won't stop pressing." "The law?" Harlan's mouth tightened. "The law tends to favor men with paper and friends who stamp it." Elias clenched his jaw. "So what do we do?" Harlan shrugged. "What folks always do out here. Hold on, negotiate, or lose." Elias looked toward the house. Clara came out with an empty sack for supplies. Her shoulders were set, but the fatigue in her was visible if you knew how to look. "She's being crushed," Elias said. Harlan's gaze sharpened. "She's been crushed before," he said. "When you left, and she stayed standing. Don't come back now and play savior, Mercer. If you help, help without hurting again." Shame rose hot in Elias's face. "I don't want to be a savior," he said. "I want to be a man." Harlan nodded slowly. "Then be one. And understand, out here, being a man is more about endurance than bravado." That evening, Clara called Elias to the porch. It was the first time she invited him close without hostility. She sat on the step, looking into the dark. Elias stood, keeping distance. "Thomas asked me today if you're staying," she said. Elias's heart quickened. "What did you tell him?" Clara was quiet. "I told him I don't know." She looked at Elias, lamplight drawing shadows across her face. "You know what the worst part was, Elias?" she asked. "Not that you left. That you left me to explain the unexplainable to a child." Elias lowered his head. "I know. You don't," she said. Not angry now, only honest. "You imagine. But you don't know what it is to hear a boy ask why his father doesn't to come back. You don't know what it is to watch him harden because he learned not to expect anything. You don't know what it is to—" Her voice broke, and she breathed through it. "To want to hate you and not manage it fully, because then I'd lose part of myself too." Elias's eyes burned. but he did not let tears fall. Not from pride, out of respect. This was her truth. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I'm asking you to let me try to be useful. Truly, no big promises." Clara looked down at the boards. "I'm afraid," she confessed. The simple word carried more weight than any accusation. "Afraid you'll stay long enough for him to get used to you, and then you'll leave again. Afraid to open the door and find it still hurts." Elias lowered himself to one knee, a respectful distance away, like a man before an altar. "Then test me," he said. "Give me work. Give me time. Let me prove it with days, not words." Clara watched him. The silence returned, but it was not a wall now. It was something being built. "There's a payment due in 2 months," she said. "If I can't pay, Rourke will have a way to take part of the land. It isn't fair, but it's how it is." Elias nodded. "I can go into town, take more jobs. Maybe?" "No," Clara cut in. "If you ride off now, Thomas will understand it the way he always has. Abandonment. If you're staying, stay. If you're leaving, leave all at once." Elias felt the choice settle like a stone. Staying meant facing not only debt and Rourke, but Thomas's eyes every day, a silent expectation, the risk of failing again. Leaving meant saving himself from that risk and sealing the boy's belief that a father was only wind. Elias looked out past the fence into the dark. The frontier was wide enough to hide a man forever. He had tried that. "I'm staying," he said, firm and quiet. "Even if it's hard, even if I'm not welcome. I'm staying because it's my duty." Clara closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if the sentence cut and stitched at once. "Then stay," she said, standing. "But understand, staying can hurt too. Don't underestimate that." She went inside. Elias remained on the porch a while, feeling the cold. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to run. And strangely, it felt like a kind of peace. The price of doing right. Elias began taking work in town too, but he returned every evening. He repaired wagons, mucked stalls, accepted hard tasks for little pay. Every coin was earned clean. He did not look for shortcuts. He did not go seeking men who lived in shadow. Rourke still appeared now and then, sometimes only to remind them he existed. Always polite enough to be dangerous. Always smiling like a blade. One day at the store, Rourke came in and stopped beside Elias like an old friend. "Mercer," he said pleasantly. "Seems you found a late vocation for work." Elias did not answer. Rourke continued, lowering his voice. "There are opportunities for men like you. Men who don't flinch from what needs doing. I could employ you. Good wages. Better than shoeing horses." Elias looked at him with a cold steadiness. "I'm not for sale." Rourke's eyebrows rose. "Everyone is," he said. "They just don't know the price." Elias felt the old temptation, sharp and familiar, the urge to take the easy road, to accept a man's offer when money is tight and pride is wounded. The frontier sells mirages, like the desert sells water. "I've paid too much for shortcuts," Elias said. "I'm not buying more." Rourke tilted his head. "We'll see," he said, and walked out. That night on the farm, Elias found Thomas in the corral, trying to brace a loose board. The boy's hands were not strong enough, and frustration showed in the tightness of his jaw. Elias approached without crowding him. "Want a hand?" he asked. Thomas hesitated, then gave a short nod. Elias set the board, drove the nail carefully. Thomas watched each movement, as if learning not only the craft, but what it looked like when a man does a thing without bragging. When Elias finished, Thomas asked suddenly, "Can you read?" Elias blinked at the question, then nodded. "My father insisted," he said. "Said a man who can't read depends on someone else to understand the world." Thomas nodded. "The pastor helps me," he said. "But it's hard." "If you want," Elias said, keeping his voice gentle, "I can help at night if your mother allows it." Thomas looked at him, and there was a small war behind his eyes, wanting and fearing the wanting. "I can ask," he said. That evening Clara allowed it, but she stayed at the table too, sewing as she watched guardian and judge. Elias opened an old book and read slowly, pointing out the words. Thomas followed, serious, sometimes correcting himself with quiet anger. When the boy managed a full sentence without stumbling, his face changed for a heartbeat, something like joy. Then he hid it quickly. Clara saw it. Elias saw it too. It was small, but it was real. And Elias understood. If redemption existed at all, it would come like this, through quiet nights and plain words and simple work. Not the kind of thing people sing about. That evening, Clara called Elias to the porch. It was the first time she invited him close without hostility. She sat on the step, looking into the dark. Elias stood, keeping distance. "Thomas asked me today if you're staying," she said. Elias's heart quickened. "What did you tell him?" Clara was quiet. "I told him I don't know." She looked at Elias, lamplight drawing shadows across her face. "You know what the worst part was, Elias?" she asked. "Not that you left. That you left me to explain the unexplainable to a child." Elias lowered his head. "I know. You don't," she said. Not angry now, only honest. "You imagine. But you don't know what it is to hear a boy ask why his father doesn't to come back. You don't know what it is to watch him harden because he learned not to expect anything. You don't know what it is to—" Her voice broke, and she breathed through it. "To want to hate you and not manage it fully, because then I'd lose part of myself too." Elias's eyes burned, but he did not let tears fall. Not from pride, out of respect. This was her truth. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I'm asking you to let me try to be useful. Truly, no big promises." Clara looked down at the boards. "I'm afraid," she confessed. The simple word carried more weight than any accusation. "Afraid you'll stay long enough for him to get used to you, and then you'll leave again. Afraid to open the door and find it still hurts." Elias lowered himself to one knee, a respectful distance away, like a man before an altar. "Then test me," he said. "Give me work. Give me time. Let me prove it with days, not words." Clara watched him. The silence returned, but it was not a wall now. It was something being built. "There's a payment due in 2 months," she said. "If I can't pay, Rourke will have a way to take part of the land. It isn't fair, but it's how it is." Elias nodded. "I can go into town, take more jobs. Maybe?" "No," Clara cut in. "If you ride off now, Thomas will understand it the way he always has. Abandonment. If you're staying, stay. If you're leaving, leave all at once." Elias felt the choice settle like a stone. Staying meant facing not only debt and Rourke, but Thomas's eyes every day, the silent expectation, the risk of failing again. Leaving meant saving himself from that risk and sealing the boy's belief that a father was only wind. Elias looked out past the fence into the dark. The frontier was wide enough to hide a man forever. He had tried that. "I'm staying," he said, firm and quiet. "Even if it's hard, even if I'm not welcome. I'm staying because it's my duty." Clara closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if the sentence cut and stitched at once. "Then stay," she said, standing. "But understand, staying can hurt too. Don't underestimate that." She went inside. Elias remained on the porch a while, feeling the cold. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to run. And strangely, it felt like a kind of peace. The price of doing right. Elias began taking work in town too, but he returned every evening. He repaired wagons, mucked stalls, accepted hard tasks for little pay. Every coin was earned clean. He did not look for shortcuts. He did not go seeking men who lived in shadow. Rourke still appeared now and then, sometimes only to remind them he existed. Always polite enough to be dangerous. always smiling like a blade. One day at the store, Rourke came in and stopped beside Elias like an old friend. "Mercer," he said pleasantly, "seems you found a late vocation for work." Elias did not answer. Rourke continued, lowering his voice. "There are opportunities for men like you, men who don't flinch from what needs doing. I could employ you. Good wages. Better than shoeing horses." Elias looked at him with a cold steadiness. "I'm not for sale." Rourke's eyebrows rose. "Everyone is," he said. "They just don't know the price." Elias felt the old temptation, sharp and familiar, the urge to take the easy road, to accept a man's offer when money is tight and pride is wounded. The frontier sells mirages, like the desert sells water. "I've paid too much for shortcuts," Elias said. "I'm not buying more." Rourke tilted his head. "We'll see," he said, and walked out. That night on the farm, Elias found Thomas in the corral, trying to brace a loose board. The boy's hands were not strong enough, and frustration showed in the tightness of his jaw. Elias approached without crowding him. "Want a hand?" he asked. Thomas hesitated, then gave a short nod. Elias set the board, drove the nail carefully. Thomas watched each movement, as if learning not only the craft, but what it looked like when a man does a thing without bragging. When Elias finished, Thomas asked suddenly, "Can you read?" Elias blinked at the question, then nodded. "My father insisted," he said. "Said a man who can't read depends on someone else to understand the world." Thomas nodded. "The pastor helps me," he said. "But it's hard." "If you want," Elias said, keeping his voice gentle, "I can help at night if your mother allows it." Thomas looked at him, and there was a small war behind his eyes, wanting and fearing the wanting. "I can ask," he said. That evening Clara allowed it, but she stayed at the table too, sewing as she watched guardian and judge. Elias opened an old book and read slowly, pointing out the words. Thomas followed, serious, sometimes correcting himself with quiet anger. When the boy managed a full sentence without stumbling, his face changed for a heartbeat, something like joy. Then he hid it quickly. Clara saw it. Elias saw it too. It was small, but it was real. And Elias understood. If redemption existed at all, it would come like this, through quiet nights and plain words and simple work. Not the kind of thing people sing about. A storm without gunfire. The due date grew nearer. Tension gathered like a low cloud. Elias saved coins. Clara sold what she could. Thomas worked more than a boy should have to work. In the final week, a dust storm came through, not rain, but the opposite, the sky throwing dirt. The wind howled, light vanished, the world turned brown and dim. Animals panicked. Boards rattled. Elias and Thomas moved fast, bracing doors, tying down anything that could tear loose, keeping the stock calm. Clara sealed windows, covered her face with cloth, protected their meager stores. The frontier reminding them, bluntly, that men control very little. At the storm's worst, part of the barn roof gave way. Elias climbed up against the wind, which tugged at him like it meant to strip him off the boards. Thomas held the ladder steady, face gritty, eyes wide, but determined. "Don't let go." Elias shouted, and the wind swallowed his voice. Thomas didn't let go. When the storm finally eased toward evening, the world looked newly made, buried in dust, as if everything had died and been uncovered again. The air was thick. Throats burned. Elias climbed down, exhausted. Thomas stood coated head to toe, but something different shone in his eyes. Not pride, not bravado, something closer to respect or relief. Clara came out and took in the damage. A broken roof meant more work, more cost, more time, things they had very little of. She closed her eyes briefly and drew a slow breath. Elias stepped toward her and placed a small cloth pouch of coins in her hand. "It's all I've got," he said. Clara weighed it in her palm and looked at him. "It isn't enough." The word struck like a stone. Desperation rose in Elias, the old instinct to find a darker road, to accept an offer like Rourke's, to cut corners when the cliff edge appears. Thomas stood nearby, listening. Elias forced himself to breathe. How much short? He asked. Clara told him. Elias did the math. It was more than he could earn in days. Clara's face held resignation, as if preparing to lose the land the way she had lost other things, quietly, without spectacle, because she had no choice. Then Thomas asked, small and plain, if we lose the land, where do we go? A simple question, a child's question, a crushing one. Clara didn't answer. Elias looked at the boy and saw fear hidden under stubbornness. Elias made a decision then, without speeches. The next morning, he rode into town, not to beg Rourke, to face the law. He went to the sheriff, a weary man named Bennett, who had seen more fights than he cared to remember and more injustices than he could fix. Elias brought old papers, his father's claim records, proof of ownership, and told the sheriff plainly that Rourke was using pressure beyond what was fair. Bennett listened with the look of a man who knows the world is crooked, but still tries to keep it from bending worse. Rourke has friends, Bennett said. And paperwork. I have paperwork too, Elias said. And enough shame to stop living on my knees, the sheriff sighed. This could turn into a county matter, he said. And county matters cost money, Elias nodded. Then tell me what I can do without turning into the kind of man I used to be. Bennett was silent, then spoke. There's an official in Santa Laurel County seat who records formal complaints. If you file, Rourke will have to tread more carefully. It can buy you time. Time. That was what they needed most. Elias rode 2 days, filed the complaint, came back with a stamped document. When Rourke arrived to press the payment, he found not only Clara, but Sheriff Bennett present, and a paper that demanded review before any seizure. Rourke smiled, but it was tighter now. Well, he said, you bought time. Elias met his eyes. That's all we need, he said. Time to prove we're not easy prey. Rourke rode off, and the dust he left behind was not victory now. It was a promise he would return. Clara looked at Elias as if seeing him in a new light still hurt, still guarded, but surprised by the effort. You rode far, she said. I should have ridden far sooner, Elias answered. She didn't smile, but there was something in her face Elias hadn't seen in years, the smallest spark of respect. What cannot be repaired? With time bought, Elias worked harder. He rebuilt the barn roof, took honest agreements. Thomas helped, and his distrust began to loosen not in speeches, but in small acts, standing closer, asking questions, accepting lessons. One night at the table, Thomas looked up suddenly and asked, Why did you leave? Silence fell. Clara stopped sewing. Elias had known the moment would come. There was no safe way around it. He looked at the boy and saw the child he had never held when he should have. Because I was a coward, Elias said. The word came simple, without decoration. I told myself I'd go for a short time and return better, but I was afraid to fail. And when I realized I already had, I was afraid to face you. Thomas frowned. You were afraid of us? Elias shook his head. Afraid of what I did to you, he said. Afraid of your mother's eyes. Afraid of my own name. Thomas was quiet, then asked in a smaller voice, Did you think about me? Elias felt his chest ache. I did, he said, on cold nights, when I saw other fathers with sons, when I heard a child crying in a camp, and it made me want to disappear. I thought about you, but thinking doesn't feed a boy. It doesn't keep a roof on. It doesn't replace being there. Thomas's mouth tightened. He stood abruptly, as if he needed air, and went outside. The door shut not with theatrics, but with a feeling the boy didn't yet know how to hold. Clara remained seated. Elias remained seated. I didn't want to hurt him, Elias whispered. You hurt him a long time ago, Clara said softly. Tonight he just learned the name of the hurt. Elias closed his eyes. The truth was hard, but clean. What do I do? He asked, no excuse in it, only wait. Clara looked at him. Stay, she said. Stay when he won't look at you. Stay when I don't know how to be with you. Stay without asking for gratitude. Elias nodded, and something in him small but real settled into place. Silence as an imperfect kind of forgiveness. Winter came early. Not with great blizzards, but with a steady cold that crept through cracks and taught humility. The farm endured. The town endured. Rourke pulled back for a time, waiting for a better angleman like him always wait. One gray morning Elias woke to find Thomas outside, watching the horizon. The boy looked smaller in the cold. Elias approached slowly. This time Thomas didn't step away. My mother says you're staying until spring, Thomas said without looking. If I can, Elias said, I'll stay past that. Thomas went quiet, then drew a folded paper from his pocket. Pencil writing uneven. I wrote this, he said. By myself. Elias took it carefully, as if it might tear. He read, simple lines about the farm, the wind, a weak calf that survived. And at the bottom one sentence stopped him. Sometimes a man comes back. Sometimes he stays. Elias looked up. Thomas was watching him serious, but not hard. Are you going to stay? The boy asked again. But now it was different. Now there was a sliver of hope in it, cautiously offered. Elias didn't make a grand promise. He had learned to treat promises like ammunition. You only use them when necessary, and you understand the harm they can do if fired careless. I'm going to try, Thomas, he said, every day. And if I fail one day, I want you to know it won't be because I didn't care. It'll be because I'm weak. But I'm going to fight that. Thomas swallowed, and then he did something Elias didn't expect. He stepped forward once. Then try, the boy said, voice catching. Because I don't know what it's like to have a father. Elias felt tears rise, and this time he let them fall. Not from weakness, but because the frontier teaches a strange truth. Some tears are like rare rain. They don't erase the desert, but they remind you there is still life. He set a hand on Thomas's shoulder lightly, respectfully. The boy didn't pull away. Behind them, the house door opened, and Clara watched. She didn't speak, but her eyes shone, and her expression was of someone who would not dare call it forgiveness, because forgiveness is a large word, but who allows something new to exist. The wind moved through the fences. The cold remained. The work would continue. Rourke would still be a threat. The world would not become gentle. But in that small thing, a boy accepting a hand on his shoulder, a woman not closing the door, there was a quiet victory. Not the victory of easy stories. The victory of endurance. The human cost of the Old West. The frontier was built of wood and iron, sweat and distance. It was built of towns raised in weeks and broken in months. It was built by men who chased new beginnings and found themselves sometimes in the worst ways. Many speak of the West as freedom, but freedom without care is loneliness. And loneliness in a country that wide carried a heavy price. Families split, children grown too early, women carrying the world without applause, men learning too late that time is not an animal you can rope and hold. Elias Mercer did not ride back to save anyone with heroism. He rode back to face what he had avoided. He rode back to learn late that the rarest courage is not to fight, it is to remain. To endure the eyes of the people you wounded. To work without guarantee of reward. To accept that some losses cannot be repaired, only honored. Life in the Old West was not a song of triumph. It was a rough prayer spoken with cracked hands and tired hearts. And still there were moments, small and nearly invisible, when a man could choose to be better than he had been. Not for glory, for duty. And perhaps that is what remains when the dust settles and the legend fades. the knowledge that in the hardest land, humanity does not die all at once. It dims little by little, unless someone someday comes back and shields a small flame, knowing the wind will fight it. Elias came back, and he stayed, and in the hush of winter, that was enough to begin.